Hello, welcome again to our today's class. My name is Winnie Barawa, and this is a continuation of our biochemistry class where we are doing organic and inorganic compounds. We had already started with the inorganic compounds where we said those are simple molecules that contain at least one or two elements, and we mentioned examples of water, gases, trace elements, and also the cases of acids and bases. So if you're coming back here, is possibly because you've watched the video on inorganic compounds. If you've not watched, you can still go back and access it. But please don't forget to watch it till the end, because in this class we are going to focus now on organic compounds. And if you're new on this channel, my name is Winnie Barawa. I'm passionate about academia, and in this channel we handle all cases around medical courses, including nursing, medicine, pharmacy, name all of them. And here we simply focus on not only classroom work, but we also do campus lifestyle hacks. How do we handle interviews with medical experts and share different. So under organic compounds, we are going to focus on carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and the nucleic acids, which are actually types of compounds too that needs to be mentioned on. But in this class, I'll keep focus more on carbohydrates and lipids. So let's dive in. So what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are simply one of the most it's like the majority component of our body system, because it's needed in terms of sources of energy in our cell respiration. And the special part of it is that carbohydrates contain the elements of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These are very key. Literally, it's known that all carbohydrates contain carbon. And the major classes of carbohydrates in this case are monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. So let's start with monosaccharides. So monosaccharides are among the simplest type of carbohydrates. They are said to be less complex, the simplest of its nature, and they're the most source of sugars when it needs to our body requiring energy for its normal activities. And literally all compounds of carbohydrates, when they need to be in the active state where we need to use them in our different levels in our body, they're mostly broken down into monosaccharides. So you can treat monosaccharides as those simplest sugars that are ready for use and they're ready for consumption to give energy to our body system. So the common examples under this category, we have glucose, which is the main source of energy for our cell. There's also fructose and galactose. However, here we have other examples that include the deoxyribose, which is an example of a pentose sugar forming majorly the DNA. And then we have the ribose, which is mainly going to form for us the RNA. So before we go into details, let's start with the glucose. So the glucose is said to be an hexose sugar. Hexose means it has six corners, or it has six ends, which are joined together with all the different types of bonds in our biochemistry structures, and it's the main source of energy for our cells. The fructose and the galactose, it's also an hexose sugar, but mostly for us to use it, we need to convert it to glucose too, mostly used in the liver when you need energy for the different metabolic activities that occur there, including detoxification and helping with the issues of bile salts to assist in emulsifications. And the other class contained here are the deoxyriboses. These are sugars that are found as part of our DNA components. So it's a pentose sugar, but it forms a bigger part when it comes to our DNA structure, which is very key when it comes to genetic coding while we are handling the chromosomes in our cells. And then we have the ribose, which is a sugar that is found in our ribonucleic acid, or what we commonly call RNA. And we will need these riboses mostly during protein synthesis, which are strongly facilitated by our RNAs. So when we reach that moment of doing protein synthesis, we'll be able to see how the ribose play a role in these characteristics. And then the second class of carbohydrates are the disaccharides. Di means two. So in this case, when you talk about disaccharide, we mean sugars that contain two monosaccharides that are being linked together by a covalent bond. So these are double sugars, or rather we say two monosaccharides linked together by a covalent bond. Examples here include sucrose, lactose, and galactose. Where do we find it? Mostly present in majority of the meals and diets that we take in. But before we can use disaccharides, most of the time it has to be broken down into monosaccharides. That's when now we can consume them or use them for our energy needs in the body. So simply means all carbohydrates in whatever compound nature they have been, they need to be broken down to the simple state, that is into the state of monosaccharides, specifically glucose, so that we can use it for energy generation. And the third class are oligosaccharides. Oligo means few, and most books will be defining this using 3 to 20 monosaccharides, which is still okay, but others they like saying 3 to 10. I don't know why, but there's always difference. But most books have seen they're just referring 3 to 20, meaning it's neither a disaccharide and it's not a polysaccharide on the other side. So being an oligosaccharide, working with the numbers of 3 to 20 composition of monosaccharides, oligosaccharides are a bit more complex compared to the other classes, and mostly they are found on our cell membranes as part of the compounds, or as part of the proteins, or I mean as part of the structures on our cell membranes. For example, the antigens. So what do these antigens do? What is the purpose of antigens mostly in our body system? Most of the time, antigens work closely to help permit or to develop our immune system. For example, when it comes to issues like blood type, we have antigen A, antigen B, and AB. All these help in determining the blood type that we have. So antigens are very strong in fighting, antigens together working with the immune system, that is cases of antibodies, they're very strong in helping us or in protecting us from infections and pathogens or microorganisms. So there's so many different types of antigens in our body, or that help in developing antibodies that will form one of the biggest components of our immune system. So there are different types of oligosaccharides, and a good example of it are the raffinose, and this is assumably part of the composition that help us in developing our antigens in our body system. But then we have the last class, the polysaccharides, which are like among the most complex class of carbohydrates. So you have the monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, which is 3 and above, and then you have the polysaccharides. Here we are talking about molecules of glucose in thousands of numbers coming together to give us this complex carbohydrate in our body system. So what are some of these types of polysaccharides that can exist? So we have starch, and we're being told that starch exists mostly in plant products. However, for our body to use it, it needs to break this starch down into simple molecule, and this case will be glucose, so that we can use it for energy production. And then the other part is the glycogen. So glycogen, it's a storage form of any excess sugar that is in our body. So if you have this extreme amount of sugars that are being produced or that are being accumulated in our body system, they'll have to be stored, and you will store it in the form of glycogen. So mostly we store our glycogen in areas like the liver, skeletal muscles. But when we need it, because remember, it's an excess of glucose. So when we need it, mostly we need to break down our glycogen to simple glucose so that we can use it for energy purpose. And then we have the last type of polysaccharide, where we call the cellulose. So cellulose is a fiber portion of our plants and can be digested even if we take it into our body system, but it's a very important type of polysaccharide, because what it does is it promotes efficiency when it comes to our peristalsis movements, more so in the colon, or what we call the large intestines. It's really key because it creates a bulk state that helps in pushing food down the system, that it can get digested and the nutrients can be absorbed. So mostly celluloses are also advised mostly for clients like those who have constipation or they have digestion issues. So because it's said to promote peristalsis and bowel movement for the person. So different types of carbohydrate that we've mentioned here, that we've mentioned with monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. So I have a diagram to summarize this. Here we go. So I have this diagram that I found beautiful and summarized. So under carbohydrates, we've mentioned monosaccharides, where we're just saying one sugar molecule forming the structure, and we gave examples here: glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then we have disaccharides, where there are two sugar molecules bonding together via the covalent bonds to give us a disaccharide compound. So we got sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And then we have oligosaccharides. And just like I'd said before, some books will tell you like they have 10 to, they'll be talking like 3 to 10. So we have raffinose and also starchose. And the last class is polysaccharides, where we have 10 and above or 20 and above. And the famous examples we had was starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So that summarizes my work on carbohydrates. And remember, in this class, we have to discuss on lipids also. So let's head over and see what lipids got to offer. So lipids, I tell people lipids is one of the most complex when it comes to its classification and how it's being discussed. You research on it and you find so many classifications, so many types, and everyone has their own ways of handling it. So I think the one that gave me easy work was this guy here. And how he summarized it is he tried to bring each and every part of lipids into this class, but also there are some that have actually been exempted from it, but let's just use it for the purpose of learning. So the main class of lipids are simple lipids, compound and derived. And under the simple lipids, we have triglycerides and waxes. Now, my main focus with the simple lipids are the class of glycerols and fatty acids, because this is where I want to go after this in our class, so that we see how they are described and how they work. So under the fatty acids, they have saturated and unsaturated fats, and under our unsaturated, we got monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So like I've told you, lipids are very, very diverse and they come in different classes, different description, but just the main thing I'd like all of us to know is just understand these are classes of lipids. They should not scare you. And under compounds, we could have phospholipids and glycolipids, and then we have cerebrosides and angiosides. The last class is the derived. So here we got examples like steroids, sterols, and carotenoids. We'll discuss them, at least a good example of them, so don't worry. But this is the diagram I found a little bit shortened. The rest, they're just everywhere and all over, not clear and not really explicit when it comes to explaining it. So let's give some respect to the lipids and give some time for those maybe who've not had time to see it clearly so that they can see it. So you can do like 30 seconds of respect so that we can check on the lipids diagram. Right, so that marks for us the elaboration on the diagram, but we can go and check a few examples of it. And my main focus will be the fatty acids. So by fatty acids, I will discuss on saturated and the unsaturated class. So here are the fatty acids. So under fatty acids, most books will also be talking of true fats or neutral fats, but fatty acids generally are compounds that are made of glycerol and fatty acid molecules. So being molecules that have glycerols and being molecules that have fatty acids, then it's being said that in these molecules or in these compounds, the amount of glycerides are of different quantities or they're differently bonded. So with the fatty acid, then we generate different classes. So like you can have a glyceride, a triglyceride, there's a diglyceride, and then we have a monoglyceride. So under the triglyceride, this is a type of fatty acids where 3 fatty acids molecule will be bonding to one glycerol. So this is like one glycerol bonding to 3 fatty acids molecules. And then we have the diglyceride, where they are saying this is a state where we have 3 fatty acids bonding to the glycerol. So the di, the tri, and the mono, they are referring to the number of fatty acids molecules in the structure. So if the structure has 3 fatty acids molecule, then we will attaching to one glycerol, then we will call that structure triglyceride. Then if you have 2 fatty acids here, molecules bonding to one glycerol, then we'll call it a diglyceride. And then the last category is the monoglyceride, where one fatty acid molecule is bonding to one glycerol molecule. So that's how these structures are classified. So that is on fatty acids. But again, we've seen that the fatty acids are also described as saturated or unsaturated. So what does it mean when we talk of saturated and unsaturated? With the saturated fats, these are fats that can exist in solid form at room temperature. Alright, most books describe room temperature like at 25 degrees. So where do we generate most of our saturated fats from? They're found in animal foods, like you can find them in beef, pork, from eggs. Sometimes also palm oil and coconut oil can be in solid form at room temperature, based on the environment where you live though. So with this case, working with 25 degrees as the room temperature, the fats that are saturated are said to become solidified in that particular temperature. The other class is the unsaturated fats. So these are fats that tend to exist in liquid form at room temperature. And it's being said that most of these oils, most of these fats are found in plant oils, like the corn oils, sunflower oils, and also the safflower oils. So plant oils tends to also to be very, very unsaturated, that they can exist in liquid form at room temperature. And at room temperature, I've already said these are temperature ranging at least at 25 degrees Celsius. So here is another category, the phospholipids. So the phospholipids, here we are talking about lipids that have phosphate group. So where we have fatty acids or lipids that contain phosphates, then we'll call these phospholipids. So in this case, we have a phosphate group here bonding to a glycerol. So that type of a lipid we call it phospholipid. So do not be like wondering what this is. Just a lipid that has a phosphate group. So example of it includes lecithins and myelin. So lecithin, this is a compound that we found it on our cell membrane, and it's very important because it's a structure that will work closely in promoting the characteristic of our cell membrane, that our cell membrane should not dissolve in aqueous solution. And these lecithin components are very key in giving that characteristic. Otherwise, our cell membrane will be able to just be dissolving and becoming non-existent. That will be crazy. And then we have the myelin, which is a type of phospholipid that is said to be found in nervous system or in our nerve cell, in the neurons that is. And what it does there, it works closely with the other cells there to generate the myelin sheath, which is very important in establishing the electrical insulation and preventing shock during the electrical impulses in our nervous system. So myelin and lecithin are examples of phospholipids. And progressing on lipids, we have the steroids. Steroids are said to have carbon and hydrogen, but steroids are very key in our body, though they form major parts of our endocrine system. By endocrine, I mean the hormonal system. They have a very big role in playing there, in generating most of the hormones in the endocrine system. However, one of the examples of steroids that we got are the cholesterols, which are produced by the liver, but also we can consume them in our body, which is one of the basic steroids that our body can have. However, we need to understand that different levels of cholesterol may not be good for our body, because we have different types of cholesterol also, where we get like the what you call the high density, low density, and very low density cholesterols. All these cholesterols have different characteristics and they may not be good for our body. However, the high density cholesterols are sometimes described to be like the good cholesterol that our body can be using, because they don't tend to cause this what you call thrombosis, or causing the state where our blood cells tends to clot or causing thrombus. So for the purpose of keeping safe, you always advise, if there's cholesterols, then you should at least check on the high density cholesterols, because the low density cholesterols are a bit unsafe, and they tend to promote more of the thrombosis processes. And the other cholesterols existing now is when you talk about the endocrine systems, the steroid hormones, but also we have some cholesterols or some steroids in that play a big role with vitamin D, and partly are found in the bile salts. So where will you find cholesterols? They'll be mostly in our cell membranes, partly participating in the phospholipid to establish the non-solving state of our cell membrane. Just like we've said, if our cell membrane was to be soluble, then we may have a very bad state for our body, so that we have our cell dissolving and disappearing from our system. So, what does vitamin D have to do with our lipids, or our steroids in this case? It's being said that the cholesterols or the steroids in our body system, they tend to be converted to vitamin D when we are exposed to the ultraviolet rays from the sun. So once these cholesterols are converted to vitamin D, we need to understand that the vitamin D plays a very big role in affecting or influencing the absorption of calcium into our bones to strengthen them. So we need cholesterol for that purpose, so that it can be converted to vitamin D, and then vitamin D goes ahead and facilitates the absorption of calcium and balancing of phosphates, so that we can maintain strong bones and teeth. However, cholesterol are converted in the liver to bile salts, which are then helping emulsification of fats during digestion, or rather it will help us in digesting our fats, so that it can be in the useful nature to be used in the different parts of our body. But again, due to the other part of steroids hormones, steroids or lipids play a bigger role in generating the sex hormones, and this includes the estrogen for the women, which are produced in the ovaries here, and then we have testosterone in men, which are produced in the testes. So steroids are key, especially when it comes to endocrine, balancing our bone structures, and the bile salts that are key in the emulsification of fats during digestion. And so that marks the end of part 1 of our organic compounds, and we've done lipids and we've done carbohydrates. So like I say, if you like this channel and you're enjoying our content and it's really helping you, not only just as a student but also as a medic or someone who is in the medical field, feel free to share this content with your friends, colleagues, and fellow students, and cycle our work so that we can get more people join the classroom. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you're new here, you can comment, like, propose new contents that you wish us to discuss on. And that's the mark of the end of our session. Bye bye till we meet again in lessons.